So today I thought I would make a video talking about pacing during long COVID or CFS recovery. So there's probably a lot to say here. I'll try to keep it as concise as possible, but the key factors is that pacing was important in my recovery journey, but not in the way that I was originally going about it. And learning to adjust my approach to pacing is what allowed me to really make progress in my recovery. So the key thing, if I'm talking about pacing with somebody, would be to see what their current approach towards pacing is, right? None of this stuff is one size fits all. What it really matters is what is your current situation and circumstances, and how are you using these tools at the moment, right? So for one person, maybe they are going too much through these like push crash cycles. So maybe they're just pushing themselves to the limit all the time, and it makes it very difficult then to deal with the symptoms that come up, right? I'm not going to say, I really just advocate for what works for somebody, right? So if somebody, I've spoken to some people who say they don't mind pushing themselves really hard and dealing with the symptoms that come up. But for somebody else, it might just be way too much, right? So often when I say something online, somebody will take it out of context and say, oh no, but you can't say that, that's dangerous for somebody else. So the key here is really, you have to decide what works for you, right? I'm not telling you what to do. I'm going to explore this from my own perspective. I'm going to share how pacing worked for me in my recovery, and then you can take from that what you want. You can decide whether maybe you want to make an adjustment towards pacing. Maybe that's what's going to help you to make some progress in your recovery, or maybe you don't resonate with what I say, and that's fine too. So for me, if I talk about my experience with pacing, the way I was approaching this initially was through a lot of fear, right? So my initial approach to pacing was what I read online in ME CFS forums, and I really applied that quite rigidly out of fear, because there's so much fear online. There's so much fear being shared about do whatever you can to avoid feeling the symptoms. Some people call it PEM or PEM, the post-exertional malaise or whatever. Do whatever you can to avoid going into that state. And what this led to for me was just making my life smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller to try and get to like a stable baseline where I had no symptoms. And this didn't work for me. I didn't get to a stable baseline, because here's another thing that, if I look back to my own journey, that's probably pretty important to touch on, is even when I looked like I was pacing pretty well, this is why I always say you have to be sincere with yourself. And I think this is what a lot of people on the Reddit forums and whatnot are not doing. And that is, you're not pacing if you're spending a lot of time doing things that put you into this kind of fight or flight mode, right? Actually, things that I was cutting out of fear of worsening my state would have been better than the things that I was doing in my so-called pacing. What I mean by that is, when I was pacing very strictly out of fear because of getting into a severe state of CFS, I was spending so much time doom scrolling on Reddit and Twitter and reading all of this stuff about the hopelessness of having CFS, of long COVID, of how we have to wait until a cure finds us, until there's some medical breakthrough, and until then we just have to keep our boundaries closed and all of that. So what's important here is doing all of that. That was putting me into way more of a fight or flight state. That was stressing out my nervous system and my physical health way more than, for example, going to take a very slow, gentle walk without my phone, just somewhere outside in nature. That would actually have been more helpful for me. But the way my mind was seeing things at the time was saying that, no, that's dangerous. I have to avoid that. And while I'm avoiding all of that, I'm going to scroll on my phone. And that was actually making me worse. That was triggering more symptoms than something like going to sit outside in nature, going to get some fresh air. Again, if what I'm saying doesn't apply to you, right? If you're somebody that is in a very severe state, then just take what applies to you, right? The reason I'm speaking like this is because I recently had some interactions with people on Reddit, which I'm now going to avoid Reddit because it's just a toxic community of negativity. I wanted to try and share and spread some hope on there, but I'll rather save my energy to work with people that are actually interested in recovering than people that are trying to defend their identity around not being able to recover. Maybe one day I have more energy and motivation to go deep into the pits again, but for now I'm feeling much more fulfilled working with people who actually want to be helped. And so the reason I'm saying all of this is because that's the classic defense to the ME/CFS pacing strategies, is that as soon as I say something like, oh, I would go for a walk instead of, scrolling on my phone, the response would be, are you crazy? Going for a walk is dangerous. You can't tell people to go for a walk. You're a moron. These are the responses that people give you on the forums. So that's why when I'm talking now, I've got all of this coming up in the back of my mind. So I might be adding in a little bit more cautionary advice than usual to just combat this if this is somebody's trigger response. But yeah, that's my thoughts on pacing, right? So strict pacing was actually, it's insincere as well. That's why I say authenticity and sincerity is really key in this whole journey, because I looked like I was pacing, but at some point I became ruthlessly honest with myself. And I said, I'm spending a lot of time on my phone. I'm spending a lot of time on Twitter. I'm spending a lot of time on Reddit. I was spending a lot of time checking the stock market. All of this kind of stuff stressed me out, right? But if somebody, wanted to go for a walk or have a cup of like coffee, okay, that's got other connotations. But, just have a whatever, meet up with somebody, go for a walk, I would have said, no ways, I cannot do that, right? Socializing is kind of pretty strenuous sometimes. So, but simple things like going outside, going for a walk, going to sit on the beach, all of these kinds of things, I started to do at some point when I just realized that I was selling myself a bill of goods, saying that I'm doing whatever it takes to recover by sitting at home, locking myself off from the world and feeding my nervous system with negativity. So when my approach to pacing shifted, sure, there can be flare-ups, right? That's where going into the unknown and being willing to feel the fear, all of my stuff on the emotion work, if you go back through my videos, this is the majority of what I've been speaking about for the last year or so, is about going into these spaces. So once you decide that you're going to try to introduce more the things that are going to be beneficial for your nervous system, that might initially have some kind of triggers around them, right? All of the fears will come up if you start to slowly grow your boundaries. So, going for a short walk, or it really depends where somebody is, right? I could say something like going for a cycle, going for a swim. And if somebody is, I'm talking to such a wide audience here of people who are in different stages, right? So if somebody is bedbound, then apply for yourself what a small step out of that would be. If somebody is housebound, apply to yourself what a small step out of that would be. If somebody is quite functional but still struggling with symptoms, apply for yourself what that might be, right? It's up to you. So then let's talk about where pacing is actually important, right? So I've been trashing on the ME/CFS approach to pacing, and I don't like to label it so much because then it's kind of creating a us versus them, which I don't really want to do. I just mean the strict pacing, right? Let's call it that rather. Strict pacing. I don't want to trigger anybody, and I don't want to create this divide. So strict pacing, we've covered that. Now, what I would call intuitive pacing or natural pacing. It's just a word, doesn't matter, but that's what I would call it. And what that looked like for me, and the reason I say that is important, is it's not like you want to do away with pacing altogether, but for me, it really stopped being pacing. I didn't even think of it as pacing anymore. But if I look back at it, I would still call it pacing. And I can see where somebody on the other end of the spectrum who's just pushing too hard, constantly getting triggered, actually, let's maybe explore some pacing for that person. Maybe that's where they are kind of have a blind spot is, well, maybe for you don't have the fear of, the symptoms, but maybe you just need to kind of pace your energy a little bit so that you don't keep sending yourself into overwhelm where you just can't handle the symptoms. So what that looked like for me was a whole bunch of tools that I was using, and using all of those tools together was what allowed me to grow my boundaries in a healthy way. So introducing things back into my life that were healthy and balancing that out with enough restorative practices to calm my nervous system, to keep me from getting stuck in freeze mode or flight or fight mode. So, when I was doing my best towards the end of the recovery, I was meditating like 3 hours a day sometimes, between 2 to 3 hours a day. To be honest, that was way more pacing than I was ever doing when I thought of myself as doing strict activity scheduling and pacing. But it didn't feel like that at all to me because I wasn't doing it from a space of fear at all. I was meditating because I really wanted to awaken. I really wanted to have deep insights on the awakening path. I listened to Sam Harris, I listened to Adyashanti, I listened to Angelo DeLulo, I listened to Locke Kelly, all of these kind of meditation, spiritual teachers. Eckhart Tolle is another one. They would talk about this shift in experiencing reality, and I knew that this is exactly where I wanted to go. And I'd been exploring it for months, but meditating a little bit here, meditating a little bit there, struggling with my symptoms, crashing, blah, blah, blah. And at some point I was like, you know what, if I want to get out of it, the reason I really wanted to do this is because I realized that's the way out of my suffering. It's not about satisfying the desires of my mind, right? The mind saying, oh, I need to get into this environment, that environment. I need to have no symptoms. I need to have this. I need to have a normal life. I need to have all the things that I've lost because of chronic illness. Through reading books about spiritual insight, wisdom, philosophy, I'd done quite a lot of exploration into this kind of territory, and it just became so clear to me that everything was about resistance, right? It was all about the mind that will resist whatever is coming up and seek a better environment. So that's where I came to the fact that I needed to meditate a lot, because I listened to Adyashanti, and he was like, before his first awakening, he was meditating 4 hours a day, weekends, sometimes more. And I was like, you know what? I'm in this environment where I've been complaining and moaning about how shit my life is, but I really want this. I need this. I need to know what they're talking about. So that was what really was driving it, right? It's, looking back, I can't think exactly how I thought of it at the time, but that was a big factor. So during that period, I was then able to start going for more walks in nature, start cycling on my bicycle, start going for cold swims in the ocean, go for a cup of tea with a friend every now and then. Socializing I would find more triggering because we go into the head, because we're talking and thinking so much. But I do think socializing is, if we find the balance of it, is important as well, because you are a human being, and there is just benefit to the connection of being with another human being. But at the same time, if you're not in that place at the moment where you can socialize, don't let yourself get too stressed out about that. I spent a lot of time in solitude on my own, and I really focused on shifting my perspective on it, that I used to let that stress me out, that I'm on my own, this is bad for me. Anytime I would hear like an Andrew Huberman podcast where he would talk about the importance of socializing for the nervous system, it would stress me out more because I was like, oh no, I'm not socializing. And then I would go into fight or flight mode and then I would have a crash. And then eventually I was like, no, people sit and meditate in a cave and they are the most content people in the world because they've liberated their mind. So I shifted my perspective on what it meant to be in solitude. But it's all about balance, right? So, if you are lacking social connection, you can take small steps to try and address that, but don't let it stress you out too much. It's okay. So I think that covers a lot of what I wanted to say about pacing. I kind of went on a tangent here and there, which is generally how these videos go, because it's all linked together, right? So one thing leads to the next. And last thing I wanted to say about pacing maybe is that I was still pacing, but I wasn't thinking of it as pacing anymore. So that's the key, is like find the things that work for you, right? And it's interesting for me, actually, recently I was really busy with life and stress and stuff again, and I could feel that taking its toll on me a bit. And then just coming back to all the things that were so helpful to me during my recovery was such a great reminder of, just go and sit in a park. Just go for a cold swim or a dip in the ocean. Go sit on the beach rather than sitting on my phone on the couch. Go sit in my car in a nice place rather than lie on the couch and whatever, distract myself on Instagram or something like that. So yeah, once you cut out the kind of pure distraction activities, you'll see you have space and energy to start to grow your boundaries. And here's the last thing I want to say about pacing is the reason I think meditation is so important is because once I learned to meditate, like nowadays what I'll do is I'll do something and then I'll go meditate for 20 minutes because it's so restful for my mind that I just feel I have. It's not a pacing thing anymore. It's just like, okay, if I want to go record a video, I'd rather go meditate for 20 minutes beforehand to kind of give me this fresh, clear mind when I want to record a video, or if I'm going to, do this or do that. I realize you could think of it as pacing, but it's not from that place of fear. It's from a place of, well, I know meditation is really good for me and it makes me feel better. And I've experimented enough without doing it that now it's easy to make that decision that, no, I want to go sit and meditate. So yeah, I'll leave it at that because I think we covered a lot there. So that's the thoughts on pacing. Use it as feels applicable to you, and don't believe the mind too much, no matter what is happening. Even if it feels like you've made a wrong turn and you've lost everything, just come back into yourself and just make small steps. I was like, what do I know that I can address here to make my situation better, that I have been avoiding, right? Maybe it means cutting out some distractions. Maybe it means implementing some restorative practice. Maybe it means being a little bit more disciplined about what you need to do, but do it from a place of love and, gentleness, as opposed from a place of harsh judgment and criticism, which will just keep the negative spiral going. So it's okay if you haven't been perfect. There's a new moment each day where you can start again and just see how can you be a little bit better going forward.